Christian, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hello.
So listen, here's the thing, kind of when we first met, we met off the back of BT Sport and Claire Balding and the fact that you were there being the presenter. And then the more we spoke and the more we found out about you, we realised you're so much more than that. And actually what fascinates us is you are a man who knows data from everywhere and does interesting stuff with that. I think the starting place for me is, who are you? And kind of, I suppose, in terms of your career, tell me more about it and how you got to where you got to.
That's a really interesting question. I mean, obviously I was on BT Sport and other channels, and my specialty was about data, but presenting about data. How I got there is you know, it wasn't a path that I decided on when I was at school. I used to be a chemist. I was a scientist, so by trade, and I worked for a couple of very large pharmaceutical companies, working in labs, so wearing lab coats. But the interesting thing about that is it's not it's completely the same as working in data. So I used to take samples of stuff, I'd clean them up, and then I'd run them through machines like HPLC, high performance liquid chromatography for those scientists out there, and I would analyse the results. And what I do in data is exactly the same. I take a raw subset of data, I'll clean it up, I'll get all the noise out, and then I'll basically look at that, I'll analyse it, and then I'll give some insight off the back. So for me, my early career is very, very similar to the career I have now. Okay. But instead of sort of looking through urine and stuff, which I used to, because I used to work on Clearview One Step, the pregnancy testing. Yeah. That's one of my things. Okay. It's sounds like a horrible job. Yes. I'm now cleaning, going through, influencers or brands or businesses or, sport data and looking for those nuggets of information. So how did you make that leap? What made you make that leap? Was that some foresight you had about how the world was going, or was that just you found yourself in a place at a time? This is a great question. And again, I can tell you exactly why I pivoted, I suppose is the word you use now.
Yes, very good.
Yes, very. I pivoted I remember I was working for a very large pharmaceutical company, and I'd been there 4 years, and there was a guy who worked in the lab with me called Norman. Hello, Norman. And he was about 55, and I was 24, 25, and he was earning like $2,000 more than me. Right. Okay. Now this sounds like a really base answer. So I remember one day I knocked on my boss's door, and I knocked on the door, and he let me in, and I said, "Hello, I'd like to earn more money, please." Yeah. And he said, "Leave." That's it. He said, "Leave," and then he caveated that. He said, "If you want to earn more money, you have to go into sales and marketing." Okay. And then I didn't feel like I wanted to become a pharmaceutical salesman or working that part of it, but it sort of opened my mind to the fact that actually being a pure play, chemist wasn't probably the best job for me. And at the time, I was very interested in computers, and that sounds so old saying computers. And we, just before Windows 3.1 and Windows 3.1 came in, and I used to spend a lot of time using computers for the analysis. So I sort of self-taught myself a bit of basic programming. And then that led to me training 2 robot arms to do basic chemical assay tests, which were called Fred and Wilmer. I think they still work now. And it was very simple, moving pipetting things into trays, very basic stuff at scale. And I really enjoyed it. So I thought with my newly gleamed computer knowledge, I thought I left. Okay. And then I went to London, like a modern day Dick Whittington. Yeah. And I'm at the time I love buying clothes. Which I still do. I love retail. I went to my favourite store, which was Liberty of London, on Regent Street and obviously Great Marble Street. And I went in there and I said, "Hello, can I work in your IT department, please?" And they gave me a job. Okay. And that was the pivot. At that point.
That's a good way to get a job.
I know. And I literally walked in off the street, and my nicest finery, had an interview, and I started working, managing their IT infrastructure. So I sort of used to manage the tills, the EPOS. Yeah. And then it was just pre-web. Web was just starting to come in. Okay. I am that old. Yeah. And then I built their first website. Okay. And then I also built, some wedding list software, all self-taught. And then I started to get interested in how customers were using the website in the same way that I was interested in how customers were using the store. Which stores were they coming to? Yeah. Which displays were working? Which tills were busiest? And that sort of real world knowledge I gleaned from working on the shop floor or around the shop floor, then related to the web presence, right? Because how were people coming in? How were they exiting? Were they nicking stuff? Not were they nicking stuff. And it became apparent to me that behaviours and people's behaviour and human behaviour is very, very similar online and in store. Yeah. And then I suppose from my point of view, that got me really interested into understanding the nuts and bolts about how websites work, but the data behind it, and started to join people's sessions together and seeing how many times people would come back. And then that led me into a whole world of web analytics, which I worked in for many years, which got me into data. So it was that was the moment where it sort of all changed for me.
I like that path, because that's almost a path of where society's gone in terms of kind of, I suppose, the journey of Amazon, for want of anyone else. Everyone now realises it's all about data. So where you are now, what's your view of data? Has it gone too far? Are we so focused on the data that we're forgetting about the human element, I suppose?
I think in some cases we are, in some cases we're not. I mean, first off, there are still, most businesses aren't using data correctly.
Okay.
Even the ones
Tell me why.
Well, because for me, the usage of data is about context. And it's about understanding your market. It's not just buying in some data and then buying an audience and then hoping they're going to respond to it. You need to understand that audience is the right audience to start with in the first place.
Yeah.
Many people don't join up what they already have. So a good example would be, I've worked with many retailers and banks where they have a transactional system of stuff, then they have like the web or the marketing stuff here, and the two very rarely intertwine and talk to each other, which means you're not understanding what customer A is doing, and customer A might be doing the same thing over here. Do you see what I mean? So,
but you described that, and that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Why do you think they're not seeing that? Why do you think these big companies aren't seeing the fact that they've got to start bringing the stuff together in order to actually get value out of the whole thing?
I mean, a lot of them are, but they're not doing the right way. Well, I think the biggest challenge for everything, and it's never been technology. So I was putting together pieces of software and work 10 years ago, 15 years ago, in order to make those systems talk to each other. So it's never been technology, it's people. I call it people silos.
Okay.
So I always view it like sumo wrestlers. Okay, so you've got two sumo wrestlers, and the bigger one is basically the one who's got the budget. So I always say it's IT and the business. So whoever's got the most money is the bigger sumo, and they win at that point in time. What we've seen over the last 10 years is the marketing team has had more money than the business, so therefore they've gone out and they've bought and acquired lots of different technologies in order to do certain things to make their lives easier, because as we all know, technology makes life easier. And what it's not doing is taking into consideration the legacy side of the business, the transaction, the data warehouses, everything else that they have. This is getting very technical very quickly, sorry. And the people that manage that side are very different to the people who manage this side, and what you get is this tension, this conflict in a business, which means I want to hold on to my competitive advantage.
Yeah.
I want to hold on to my competitive advantage, and never the twain shall meet, unless you have a CEO or a board that are bought into the notion that data is important, should be democratized, and should be accessible to all in the business.
Okay.
And then that's where you get real change. Sorry, that's
And I appreciate. But I appreciate that kind of you saying some companies are doing better than others, etc. Are the people who aren't doing it? Is it because they're holding on to the old way, or is it because no one's come in and educated them in terms of the new way?
I think education's all around us, because all we're told now is how important data is. A really clear example of basically people holding on to an old way of doing things is polling. Okay, so political, the last two elections, Brexit, everything else that's happened, we've been told it's going to go one way because a small sample of people who are paid for an opinion have said something, whereas the result's gone another way.
Okay.
Now, if you looked at, for example, Facebook data during the Brexit, the last Brexit deal, there was 44 million people of a voting age in the UK on Facebook, right? By their behaviours and traits, you can figure out that actually people who want to leave the European Union, were a lot greater number than the people who want to stay in the European Union.
Okay.
So the data there, the data was there to indicate the result, but actually pollsters ignored that, because obviously for them it's not what they do. What they do is they go and ask a sample of people about a thing, and then they get a result, and then they feed that out. Do you see what I mean?
So but how's that going to change? Because the pollsters want to protect.
Yeah, I mean, how's it going to change? They need a culture of understanding there are different ways to do things. And I think the challenge around a lot of businesses, a lot of brands are very successful because they're good at what they've done. Yeah. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be successful in the future. They're good at what they do now, but they're not necessarily. So therefore, they haven't got one eye on how they're going to improve that. They've got one eye on retaining what they've got already. So
going back to my question, which I asked before, which I still think is valid. Have we gone too far in terms of almost a bit like society? we believe in data and everything's data, we've got to be moneyballed, we've got to kind of it's the only way forward, or we've been successful always, we don't need this data, kind of AI is not going to take over us and conquer the world, we are fine as we are. And actually those people in the middle are few and far between who can balance up the whole thing.
Yes, I mean that's a completely valid statement. And you know there are extremes. There are businesses which are fully functioning, fully AI driven, fully data driven, that are making the right next best activity decisions based on that data, and they're doing very well. There are also a lot of businesses who have those systems that aren't doing as well, because they're forgetting that actually sometimes creativity and human touch and those things are very, very important. And then at the other end you have businesses who are just phenomenally successful just by doing what they do. If you think about a company like Nike, for example, Nike is a fantastically, I think it's the third largest fashion brand in the world if you look from sales and looking like that. It's a phenomenally successful business, and there is a bit of data at the heart of what they do, but it's creativity is at the heart of what they do. What they're very good at is amplifying that by understanding their audience. So they're using data to get the message out and do it well, but they're not using that insight and data to the products, and they still put that in the hands of the experts. And whether that will come up to, like it did Polaroid or BlackBerry, will come to get them in the end, I don't know. But as it stands, they're very good at that end, but they're not good at this end. Do you see what I mean?
No, absolutely. So where do you sit in this? This is about you, Christian. Where do you view yourself?
Well, the interesting thing is, I'm quite old. I'm really old. I've got quite a few years of experience of working with lots of different types of organisations, and I suppose for me I always talk about this like it's about blinkers, right? So most people, when they have a job, they're cogs in a big machine, and they're so focused on doing a good job. If I'm a data analyst, for example, I'm focused on the report in hand, or the piece of insight, or the report I've got to do in hand. I'm not necessarily focused on how that is going to impact the bigger picture. And I suppose what I do is I actually become that conduit. I become the person that sort of joins the dots up between the different analysts and the business and the IT department, and sort of create the picture, the jigsaw, or tie a bow around the whole thing to create a piece of insight which is valid to the entire business that they understand. I always say that the reason you talked about TV earlier on, I mean, I used to do basic presenting on This Morning, on Claire Balding, on lots of other shows, and my presenting stuff was data. So I would get some information and I would turn it into a piece of content or a result or some insight which was relatable to the audience I was talking to. Now, in my professional life, that audience might be the board of a bank. In my TV life, it might be the audience for Big Brother or for This Morning. But they still have to have the understanding of what I'm trying to tell them. And I think the key thing, one of the big key takeaways for me is understanding what else is going on, but then actually making that information as understandable to the audience as possible. Because if they can't understand it, then you haven't done your job properly.
So does it frustrate you they don't understand what you're doing behind the scenes in order to give them that information, or are you comfortable with the fact that you hold this level of mysticism?
Well, there's no I mean, it's like showing you working in maths, right? No one wants to see the working; they just want to see the result. Unless you're a maths teacher, then you want to see the working, because obviously you might get to the wrong result. For me, like I call it the Swan Analogy. It's that graceful-looking swan. You've got that nice little report or that dashboard which is sort of swimming along. You don't see how fast the legs are going underneath.
Absolutely.
And in the old, say 15 years ago, when I started doing this work, a lot of the work I was doing was manual, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of a lot of Perl, a lot of bit of Unix, trying to get all this information together. Now with AI, with Watson, BigQuery, I can actually get to those nuggets of gold, if you like, a lot quicker, because actually I can brute force where I might have 10 or 15 people doing it. So I mean, I don't get frustrated that people don't see that, because most people don't want to see that. All they want to see is like, is it great or is it not great?
So listen, kind of absolutely planned career, you kind of knew where you were going, you saw data was the future, and you've mapped the whole thing through. Where we are now in society and where data is and AI is, what's happening, what's going on? What are you seeing?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of uncertainty around.
Yes.
And that uncertainty is coming from lots of different areas.
Yes.
I won't mention the B word, but there is so much uncertainty in all markets at the moment, not necessarily in European markets, because I feel we're at this point where it's almost like another industrial revolution in a way. In fact, we are in an industrial revolution. Imagine I am if we roll back 200 years and I worked on a farm and I was digging,
Toiling
toiling the land, and then suddenly I saw this plough coming or whatever, and completely changed the way I do things.
Yeah.
I feel that as a society, we're at that point now where we're feeling pressure because suddenly technology is enabling us to do things maybe that we haven't done before. But what we've got is an education structure that hasn't really caught up with what is happening with technology. So we're all trained a certain way, and actually technology is changed the way that we see or perceive things, and it's like we haven't got the skills yet, or we haven't learned the skills yet in order to help us leverage what's going on.
Okay.
So a good example would be, how people learn things is like you learn the times table or whatever, you retain some knowledge. Now we all know that we don't need to retain any knowledge.
Yeah.
I can be the best pub quizzer in the world by just surreptitiously looking at my phone under the bar.
Yeah.
And it's like that reflection of how things have changed needs to be reflected in how we work and how we learn, right? So it's like, instead of it's about retaining knowledge, it's about how you research the knowledge that's out there.
Okay.
A thing for me is, and that might come from stringing together 8 or 9 different data sets or looking in lots of different data sources. And that sort of brings back to the work that I'm doing now, whereas if I'm working for a TV company and they want to get a new show commissioned, I don't just look at the audience numbers. I look at, effectively the economic markers. I look at, do people want to be entertained, or do they want some more factual? What is the price of oil? I mean, if you start to bring in lots of different data points into that message, you can get an indication of whether that show is right for that time and that channel for that audience.
Okay.
So it's about, as I said before, stringing together a lot more information about a thing in order to make the thing, research the thing and to make it worthwhile.
And how do you identify what those 8 or 9 data markers are? Is that your knowledge, or is that you feeding off the team who are putting together the program?
Well, I love TV people, but it wouldn't come from them.
Okay.
For me, it's about. It's pretty simple. It's about looking at the last. I mean, you have to look back to go forward. I often feel, especially with some things. So, for example, in that TV analogy, I looked at the last 50 years TV viewing figures. I overlaid the unemployment figures. I overlaid economic markers. I overlaid for wars. I overlaid how hot the summers were and how cold the winters were. And what you could see correlations between peaks in certain genres and things that are happening.
Okay.
So, and then if you could then predict, for example, that the interest rate's going to go up, which they are a bit, and then what I do, when interest rates went up, people wanted more entertainment shows.
Okay.
So it sounds very scientific, and it is reasonably scientific, but it's effectively making predictions using data that's that is out there and happened in the past. And it's not just going, people like this thing, so therefore we're going to do more of those things, because we know that doesn't work. I mean, people couldn't have picked up, for example, the success of Love Island.
Yeah.
But the reason Love Island was successful was not necessarily because it was a great show and people like watching lots of semi-naked, young people, cavorting around in a villa. It was, if you think about the time that series was very, very popular. We had Trump, we had Brexit, we had this whole notion of uncertainty, and people were like, I don't want to think about that anymore. I want to think about this.
The light, fluffy.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't debate shows with Jon Snow talking about, the impact of leaving the European Union. It was some women and blokes cavorting around a pool in a villa. Do you see what I mean? So it's not necessarily just how good the content is. It's about when you put it out and the things that are around it. Shows that aren't successful could be more successful if they're pitched at times when shows like them have been popular in the past. Okay.
And do you think that's the same for, that's obviously the media market, is that the same as the retail market? As in, if you're launching a new, traditionally we've had kind of, obviously the winter and then the summer kind of launches of new clothes lines, etc., but actually they should be more tailored.
Well, think about that, for example, right? So, winter clothes goes into sale from November to January. That's when the sale is, and that's winter clothes. Then they bring in summer clothes.
Yeah.
When traditionally do we have winter?
February.
Yeah. I mean, and then we're in that situation where unless you've been clever enough to buy a coat in the sale, you try and go buy a coat today. You can't get one. We can get one, but it won't be right. So this notion of seasonality in retail is almost ridiculous, especially with the way that maybe global warming is changing the way that the climate is. And I say maybe because just in case you've got any deniers of watching this video, I'm inclusive for everyone. And it's not just that; it's in every aspect is understanding that the context, the timing, and the difference it can have. A good thing is, about 5 years ago, I wrote a TV show about it's all about TV, by the way, about can you beat the housing market using data?
Yeah.
And I built a 150-point model, which looked at all of London, and then basically by a number of things, by like how far away from coffee shops you were, unemployment rate in certain EU countries, you can effectively build a profile of London and look at the value of that property and see whether it's worthwhile or not.
Okay.
Because for me, there's obviously a bubble,
Yeah.
but how much of that bubble is a bubble and how much is real value?
Okay.
And it's the same thing when you're buying a house. You know, do people look at information? I know Zoopla do a good job of exposing some data, but they
Yes.
don't expose all data. We still buy property through emotion.
Yeah.
We still go, I like that house. Yeah, when your mum stays, you can have that spare bedroom. You know, for that 100 grand that extra bedroom's cost you, you could put up in Claridge's for the twice a year she stays. Do you see what I mean? Or people buy a house, my sofa will look nice in that front room.
Yeah.
They don't think, well, actually the house is £500,000 and the sofa's £2,000. Do you see what I mean? And for me, you can use that data and insight that is publicly accessible or freely accessible if you know where to get to in order to make a much more informed buying decision. And I don't just mean people reviewing things, because I think that can be obviously quite...
Still an emotional
level. Yeah. But actually about me, the context around me.
So what's next for you? What kind of, in terms of the life plan, in terms of kind of what? Okay, so let me rephrase the question. What industries interest you for you to be able to go in and have a play with, where you think they're either not using data well or not using data at all, where actually it can have a massive impact with minimal change?
Well, I think I'm interested in the human market. When I mean human, I mean talent. So I mean, obviously there are already, you know, when I say talent, as in talent for people who have normal jobs, sorry about the inverted quotes, that already exists, and there's lots of software that exists around measurement around different data points.
Yes.
What I'm interested in is the measurement of talent, i.e. celebrities, influencers, a bit of sports people, because I think that there's a lot of data about people, celebrities, but a lot of it's untapped. Okay. So, for example, I mean, you're in the business, right? So, if an advertiser comes to you and says, "I want to use, you know, Brian, here's £100,000," and then another advertiser comes to you and says, "I want to use Brian, here's £50,000." More often than not, Brian is going to be swayed by the bigger check, whereas the other advertiser might have a much more receptive audience to Brian's message, and obviously the longer tail is a lot greater. Agents tend to be swayed by the bigger check as opposed to what's going to happen, you know, the longevity of what's going on. So I'm now working with a number of talent agencies around looking at their celebrities and defining models and strategies around the audience they have and the audience they want to garner going forward. And I've worked with some very large names, which I won't mention, but you know, and it encompasses not just, you know, presenters, but also sports people, and even done a couple of actors. So it's about what should they be doing, what sort of roles should they be doing, what's the next for them, you know, what audience, what ancillary audiences or adjacent audiences are interested in them, where could they go next, what's the next leap? You know. And
so it's interesting from my perspective in terms of, I suppose the last bastion would be the creative industry, kind of, and you talk about the agencies, because the creative industry will always turn around and say, hey, kind of data can never replicate the emotional factor of what we're producing, etc., etc. But you're going in and saying, well, hold on, it absolutely can.
As I always say, data, everything that everyone does is formulaic. Okay. I know that formulaic might be very long and convoluted, but you know, there's a beginning, middle, and end. Yeah. There's an act 1, an act 2, prologue. There's dialogue. You know, there's you start a picture, you end a picture. You start a song, you end a song, right? All of that is a formula. Okay. Nature is a formula, the Fibonacci sequence. Yeah. How we enjoy that media or that content, that song, that picture is subjective. So applying data in a creative process should be at the start, should be at the beginning, middle, and end of that creative process, because actually the creation of it is not subjective. The enjoyment is subjective, and I think that's where people get very, very not confused, but that's hung up on.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for your time today, Christian. I really appreciate it. No, it's been an honour. Cheers.